Hey everybody. Um, Eric's going to be on in a second. He'll be starting us off today. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm doing pretty well. I'm watching the Chiefs game too. They're winning. That's pretty good. Uh, Midterms went okay for everyone. Yes, no. Kind of okay. Yeah, they're a fun time. I'll wait for Eric to get on. Oh, there he is. Hey Eric.
How are you, Carson? Rocking your
Oh,
Chiefs jersey. I like it.
yeah, I know. I think it's been a fun game so far. They're winning. So we'll see if they can keep that up though. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
Um, yeah, I think people will start like trickle in so we can start. Go ahead.
Awesome. So, yeah, well, this is exciting. This is like an exciting week. We are moving into the point where I know when you signed up to sort of write a book, you're like, wait, we've done no writing yet. So now we're here to sort of start. So first off, you should all be super excited. You are all in really great places. I was telling Carson today, by and large, this group, like I would say, is further along than typically we've seen in other groups before. So I think overall you should be super excited. And you may feel like, oh gosh, like I'm just getting started. Yeah, of course you're just getting started, but I think you guys have really embraced the process. And so super excited. You guys should feel really good about yourselves. And there is no behind, right? You're just like going through the process, and we're going to keep pushing on with you guys a little bit here. So tonight, I'm going to cover a couple things with you guys. I know all of you hopefully have signed up for one-on-one time with me. If you haven't yet, just grab 15 minutes for next week, and I'll kind of just hear about where you're at and help on those sorts of things. But tonight we're going to sort of do two things, and I'm going to spend a few minutes with you on helping you start to figure out how to populate parts of your story index tonight, as well as we're going to outline your first story that you're going to try and write this week. Now, kind of from a general standpoint, just to understand kind of what's coming a little bit. This week, you're going to be getting connected with your developmental editor, and this is going to be a person who's going to be helping you really learn how to write for a book, right? Most of us have learned how to write term papers, and I'll be frank with you, I don't really want to read a term paper. No one else does either. So we're going to try and help you unlearn how to write in term paper way. You're going to probably write that way anyways a little bit, but we're going to help you unlearn some of those techniques to learn how to write. So what you're going to really be having is there's going to be 3 chunks of time when your development editor is really going to be giving you some bigger feedback. So 2 weeks from now, they're going to read everything that you've done to date and give you some feedback on it, like, how to improve your writing. Hey, Nico, like you should add more dialogue, or I really like what you're doing, Katie, or whatever it may be. So that's going to be the first milestone. Then a couple more weeks later, they're going to read everything else that you create and give you some more feedback. And then we're going to have kind of the last chunk of read is what we call the pre-approval for publication. The publisher is going to get a recommendation from your developmental editor on are you on track to be published? And assuming that's the case, you'll actually get confirmation that your book is publishable on January 2nd. So kind of fucking cool, to be honest. Like crazy to think that you'll have that confirmation coming up here very soon. So kind of what we're going to do tonight is those things. We're going to get you sort of set up to sort of attack this first little couple weeks of writing so you can get some feedback. Again, the biggest thing that people struggle with writing a book is they sort of like write a whole bunch of stuff and they just keep writing more, and it's really, really terrible and so they have a whole bunch to do. So we're going to avoid that. We're going to help you write, get a bunch of feedback on it, write, and then keep going along the way. So what I'll share with you a little bit is what we're going to do tonight is sort of help you set up your sort of like plan for really the next 2 weeks. And sort of what I would tell you is, again, don't stress out on these sorts of things, but do what you can do. The typical author in their first sort of 2 weeks will write about 3,000 to 5,000 words. You'll finish about like 4 to 7 stories. And these are first drafts that you're writing. You're not writing anything great. It's going to be crappy. And that's okay, right? Like it's just about getting it done. So the goal is I want you to be comfortable writing crappier stuff. I know that sounds weird, but I'm serious about it here. Like I want you to write first drafts. I want you to take a stab at it and then get feedback on it and make it better. So that's really sort of the goal of what we're going to try and do is help you unlearn some of those patterns of like, oh my gosh, this isn't very good. Like, what are they going to think? Listen, I've seen way worse than the first draft stuff you'll turn in. So just create stuff, and remember, it's going to get way better over time as we go. All right, so we're going to dive into these things now for a little bit. So I'm going to open up Quip and kind of walk you through a few pieces as we're going along here. So I'm here in Quip, as you can sort of see right now. Hopefully you can see this one. So what I'm going to do is we're going to basically start by populating a little bit of your story index for the week, the stuff you're going to sort of attack. So here I am in the main page here. If you haven't yet, go ahead and go into the author materials folder, your sort of folders you got here, and find your folder. So for this one, I'm actually going to walk into and show you Anish's. Anish just turned in his document a little bit here. I'm going to very quickly show you a bit about what his story index is. So he's been, just so you can see, Anish is writing a book on search funds, which is, if you're not too familiar, it's sort of a way to sort of like start a business by buying an early stage business and kind of then making it better. That's sort of the idea behind it. So as you can sort of see here, if you haven't looked at his stuff, he's done a bunch of his primary interviews, just some of the people that he's talked to. And again, these were interviews that he got over time. So he populated things as he went. And then you've got his research dashboard of some of the places that he did. So one of the things that I want to highlight here is this sort of story here that he has at the start. We're going to walk into this a little bit. This guy named Irving Grausberg or whatever, Grausenberg, something like that. Anyway, this was one that he started with here. And what I'm going to urge you to think about these first sort of 2 weeks is probably to write some of your these secondary interviews up. They're a little bit easier to start with. So we're going to show you a little bit of how to sort of populate something like this. So you can see he sort of got a YouTube link that he did that he watched about this guy. He's got an article that he saw about him and some notes on this sort of guy. So what the idea here is to sort of populate what you're going to work on for the week in your story index. And you're going to start to move things over into this document. This is kind of going to be, think of your story index as basically your to-do list. That's sort of what it is. It's going to be a way that you sort of each and every week talk about what you're doing. So you're going to see for Anish, his first week, he basically laid out an article that he was going to write on with the theme of the origin of search funds, and an article about this guy named Irv Grausberg. And he writes a little bit about the story arc, the takeaways, and these sorts of things that he did. And when he was done with the story, he wrote it up and tagged it. Now, what we're going to do right now is we're going to take just a couple minutes and basically try and populate your story index with a couple things that you're planning to maybe tackle this week. My advice to you is this week to maybe start with a couple of these secondary interviews that you've done or you're interested in doing, and start there. If you've got a really good primary interview you want to write up, awesome. But my advice to you is to sort of write up the first 3 things you want to do for the next about 5 or so minutes. Just kind of like write up what they are. We're going to tackle one of these tonight that we're going to try and outline a little bit. So go ahead, if you haven't already, go into your story index and see if you can identify 3 to 4 stories that you think would be fun to write up. Write the things that you're interested in. And again, you can see he just sort of took some notes in here of what he wanted to do in that sort of way. So I'm going to be doing it live with you guys a little bit, but go ahead and go into your story index if you haven't already and start to basically just write what you're interested in tackling for the week. So I'm going to go into my I think I have one in here, don't I? I think I have some somewhere here. I'll go into mine and write as you guys are going. But we're going to spend the next 10 minutes kind of populating your story index with the 4 things that you'd be interested, 4 stories that you'd be interested in writing. And my advice is, lean towards sort of secondary ones, because for the most part, those are ones that are going to feel more natural, like things that you've probably done before.
And also, if I could add something real quick, I think personally the stories index is like the most important document in terms of keeping your organization. Definitely you can use the interview dashboard and research dashboard as much as you want. I mean, obviously it helps quite a bit, but this is like very critical. So make sure you keep up with this. Yeah,
and the story index is based, as you're going, this is based on, we interviewed like about 120 set of called serial authors, people who did multiple books. This is the type of document they said was critical. You basically want to have a weekly to-do list. Actually, this is how Stephen King writes his books. He literally has like a document where he says what he's going to do for the week, and then he fills it out and attacks it along the way. So I'm going to be filling out a couple lines of this one as we go, just based on some sort of some stuff that could be in here. But remember, these are just more notes for you more than anything, and kind of start to fill things out as you go. And the goal here is over the next 10 minutes or so, just to try and populate 3 or 4 or 5 stories that you think, I'd be interested in writing.
I have a quick question.
Absolutely.
So I am a lot of my, or not a lot of the book, but a lot of the theme is going to be personal things that I've experienced in my life with mental health. And then I'm trying, through my interviews, I'm trying to back that up as well. And some of the theories I have with some other people's experiences. Is it, whenever you said that there's like a certain percentage that the book will be about these interviews and this stuff, how would you explain people who are doing or putting a lot of their personal information in the book with stories? Like, should I focus
Yeah,
on
so
that?
you should treat them. You should right now. Don't worry about any of those things. Write whatever stories you're compelled to write. So secondary stories, primary sort of interviews, secondary interviews, primary interviews, or personal stories. For now, don't worry about it. Just write what you're most compelled to write, and those could be personal stories as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. And again, you should not judge anything that you're writing. Just start writing what you want to write, right? Like lean into the things that you're most compelled to write. And I would just tell you, if you're not sure, my advice for this week is to start with some secondary ones because you'll see they're a little bit easier to write because they'll be most traditional of what you want to do, of what you've done previously. Sorry. And one thing is you're filling this out, you don't have to write too much on the story index unless you kind of want to write some high-level bullet points in there. But for the most part, I would say kind of write a short little theme of what you think this is about, who are the main people involved, any kind of big takeaways that you think you want to do at this point. So just sort of focus on columns, sort of, theme, detailed theme, the people involved, and probably the takeaways or maybe any kind of notes that you have on this one. Again, think of this a little bit like you're starting to fill out your to-do list. That's kind of what you're going to be doing. Just, 4 or 5 stories you think could be interesting to write sometime. Again, they can be personal, they can be interview based, or they can be secondary interview based, whatever you're interested in covering. spend just a couple more minutes on this, and Carson, you'll save some more time at the end to keep populating this one. Again, think of this as your sort of like long-term to-do list. Whenever you're inspired by any sort of story, something from an interview you've got, something you've got from a research you had, whatever it may be, this is the place you just put it in, and it kind of will outline what you eventually will start to write. What we're going to be doing every week, and Carson and you guys are going to be doing in these sessions, is picking off what are the couple things you want to potentially tackle this week. And we're going to be talking today about how to turn that into a story. So give yourselves another like 1 minute or so to make sure you've got at least your first one at the top that you want to sort of tackle with me tonight laid out. And then again, you'll have time tonight to continue to populate this one. But the goal is to take everything from the interviews you've done, the secondary research you've done, personal stories to Julia's question, whatever it is, and just populate it in here. This is going to kind of be the to-do list that you're going to be attacking over the next 10 weeks or so. So take another minute or so. All right, so just as a quick reminder, I'm going to show you this one more time. This is kind of the one I'm going to use as a quick example that we're going to go through. So this is the basic story that we're going to tackle with this story based on what Anish did from Irv Grousbeck. Again, he talks about the origin of the search fund. He talks about a little bit of this detailed theme. This guy Irv, his actually turns his roommate is Amos, weaves some moments of their search phase, some interesting takeaways and this sort of stuff. So that's the basic thing. And if you look at, I want to quickly show you kind of his, let's see, resume share, stop share. Sorry, real quick. Sorry, sometimes when I jump between things, it's a little weird here. All right, so this basically shows you kind of the secondary interview stuff that he's got. So when you're putting your stuff together, these are the sorts of things that you're going to be looking for. Again, this is mostly stuff that he pulled from Wikipedia. You saw that there was an article here that he pulled a bunch of language from, and then a couple quotes from another article that he did, so from a YouTube video and stuff like that. So these are some just examples. Again, this is basically like what you would do from a research standpoint if you were researching for a paper. You would just pull this stuff in. There's nothing sort of super magical about this. Now here's where it gets a little magical, though, is we're going to teach you a way to write using this structure, if you saw in the videos, of basically sort of stealing these story structures. So let me take you to this one. Sorry, it sort of gets weird on me here. I'm going to reshare this one. So what you're going to do is, if you haven't already seen this, I'm going to show you very quickly. Inside the R sessions folder, so here I am in this folder, I'm going to show you very quickly the structure. So in this R sessions, create stories, I've got this document here that's basically called 7 basic plots, story plots. And so these are the sort of story plots that we've got that you're going to basically use to write your story. So what you're going to do is hopefully identify the story that you're going to write tonight. And so, you know, for this Irv story. So what Anish had identified is basically this concept that he was going to use the quest. So I'm going to copy this exactly that same. I'm just going to take this concept here, and I'm just going to basically just go in and click copy. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to then set up a new document. So again, assuming this is back in my folder here, I'm just going to set up a new document, and I'm going to write this story and just call it this, the story of Irv G. I don't know much about it. I'm going to write down that he's my hero, right? Irv is my hero. I'm going to write the takeaway is some basic gist about that, like, you know, it's going to take you some trial and error to get it right. And then I'm going to use the story structure of the quest, right? So story structure. I'm going to use the quest. Now, just the quest really quickly again, so you can just see it one more time, is this is sort of the story structure of the quest. It's telling the story from this structure here where you are going to take the content you have and structure it in a way that reads in the story. So you've probably seen these sorts of stories in movies before, but the quest is a very common one. You called on this quest to do something, right? To do, you know, going out there and have some journey. So if you've ever seen Indiana Jones, if you've seen Star Wars, like all these movies have the same sort of thing. You're going to write stories in this way. Now, it may seem weird, like I interviewed this guy about mental health. How can this fit into it? But I promise you that like we're just going to use this as a framework to tell stories in an interesting way. So here's the parts. It starts with the call and the preparation to leave, the journey across perilous lands, arrival and frustration that the quest is not yet completed, some big final ordeal, and then finally the goal is achieved. So again, as you see, what I've done here is I'm just going to basically go in, I'm going to copy this concept here. And then what I've got is I'm basically going to then paste this just like this. So paste special, I'm going to paste special values. So I've got my things here. And so what I've now got is I've got basically the outline of the story, right? That what I've got in this case. So what you're going to do tonight is you're going to start to fill in the blanks. Now, it's going to be sort of a little bit funny to think. You're going to be like, well, this doesn't, how does this work, right? Well, you'll find that it'll just start to work as you take the content you have and plug it in. So in this case, right, we've got some information from some of these other pieces. So we know that the quest was met his roommate at Stanford. Both didn't want Stanford MBA. Both didn't want to work at GE. Found a professor who described the search fund. So now I've kind of got like, that's their call and preparation to leave. And hopefully I have some quotes. Let me see if I can pull this quote really quickly. Let's see. So pull this quote. I'm gonna go back to this. So I pulled this quote right here, and this is a quote that I'm gonna copy in here. This is something that he says that a quote. So he's got this journey about, put out a call to his network. Where family was really unhappy. And then I'm going to go here and talk about this next point in it, the journey. So talk about the points that he says. This point, you see this is another quote from this article that I stole right here. So needless to say, over the first 6 to 8 months, we looked at these wonderful businesses like indoor tennis centers, bowling alleys, plastic inflatable companies, all these sorts of things. So arrival and frustration that the quest is not completed, right? Like we do the search fund in 6 to 8 months, we're not sort of seeing those sorts of things, right? I'm just stealing exactly this content, right? Like I'm not doing anything magical about it, but you're gonna do the same. And then eventually, you go and you find that Irv has this story about their sort of final success. We stumbled onto nursing homes. That's kind of the thing that they stumbled onto. So they finally like have their final ordeal, which is this nursing home idea. So nursing home concept, and then this became the first of their search funds, became massive. So all you're doing is structuring the pieces of this in a way that will read like a story. Now, again, it's going to feel very unnatural because we don't write this way. We typically write in a way that is like, here's the intro, I say some things, and I write 3 bullet, paragraphs and these sorts of things. What you're doing is you're structuring this, take the content and plug it into this fit a little bit. You're going to take a story that might not seem that interesting and make it seem more interesting as a result. So that's what I would kind of take a few minutes right now and sort of like try and plug in this into one of your stories that you're interested into this structure. It may feel unnatural, right? It may feel like, well, this doesn't seem to work well. You'll play around with the right structure here, but again, sort of follow along the sort of structure to see what it is. Now, for example, let's just say that you decided instead to use the overcoming the monster, right? So I've just gone in and I've copied this structure instead. So let's say that instead I wanted to tell the same story, right? I'm going to use the same content basically, and I'm going to use another story structure. Just sort of watch what I'm doing here in this sort of funny way. So overcoming the monster instead, right? So if you see this one is a different one. So let's just say that in this case, rather than I'm going to tell some of the same content, but tell it in a different story arc. In this case, the monster equals working for GE, right? So he didn't want to become kind of a corporate suit. He wanted to work for General Electric. So you could retell the story in this overcoming the monster, where the monster is working for GE. So you tell about him at Stanford MBA. He sees all his friends. He, has all these issues with, I sold the same stuff right up here where, it's not working very well. He's got this frustration stage, not these problems. He's running out of money. And then finally they find the nursing home. So again, the same basic concept, I'm just plugging it into somewhere differently. It's just a way to tell stories that people want to hear in that sort of way. So that's kind of what I would urge you to spend a couple minutes here thinking about, is plug this sort of in. And I know it sort of will seem unnatural. And when we talk about it next week, you're going to be like, this doesn't work, Eric. You're wrong. Like, this definitely doesn't work. Because it's hard. It's a weird thing that you're doing. But I'll tell you, once you try it a few times, it'll start to make sense a little bit. Again, humans love consistent story structures. We like to know the way things are going. And so you're going to get better at telling stories using these sorts of frameworks. So steal one of these things. And remember, you may be right or wrong. Like, the quest was the one that Anish used. And then I was like, well, maybe let's try the overcome the monster. This still fits in the same thing. It's just using the way to tell it in this way. And then when you write it, you'll basically just write it in these places. You'll basically write it up to say, Irv was an MBA student at Stanford. He previously graduated from Amherst. And I'm just going to write these things in very ugly, sort of yucky ways, right? And then eventually I'm going to start to remove these pieces, right? I'll eventually delete these pieces until it turns into something. But it's giving you a structure to fit within and then to write from there. So take another couple minutes, and then, I'll as you're going through it, I'll answer some questions, and then I'll let you guys kind of like continue on and populate the story index, and Carson can kind of work with the rest of the crew. So take another 3 minutes, try this out a little bit, see how it feels. And then, and I will tell you, basically any story out there can fit into one of these 7. You just have to tell it in a way that fits in that way. So again, this could be something that happens in a day, like a time you went to the bar, or it could be a story that took place over someone's career. Either way, but it certainly will work in different ways. So take another 2 minutes, and then we'll chat about questions you guys may have. So here's the result that I'll share with you really quickly to see. This is it. This is a very first draft story. Happened to be pretty long because he had some pretty long quotes in it. But you'll see he basically, here's the main character he wrote, the lesson. And then he kind of went through and wrote some things. You can see this is sort of the setup. If you remember, this is sort of the preparing for the quest. You can see this part, like in here, some of the details of it. You can see the end part about what kind of the result was at the very end. And as you see, what happens too is that now Andrew, who is the developmental editor for Anish, was reading it and was giving him some feedback, saying, hey, this is a really good line, or here's some things you might want to build on here, or I noticed this, or whatever it is. That's kind of the feedback you're going to get to make these things get better and better over time. Now, this is, again, a first draft. When I read through it, I was like, oh, man, you need to do this. You need to fix these sorts of things. But it just was a good way for him to get a first draft. The idea is that this should probably, writing a story about this length should take you no more than an hour, right? That's about what it is. To write about 1,000 words, you should spend an hour, and should be pulling in places, have it be ugly, whatever it is, but that's kind of the framework to go from that. So I'll pause here, answer questions, then I'll let you guys kind of continue on. And my sort of what I would say to go through this sort of stuff, and then Carson kind of give people the next bit of time at the end, sort of share what's your plan for the next kind of week. What are the sorts of things you're going to be tackling with the group? And then, next week we'll chat about how it sort of went. So questions before I let you guys work for a bit more, keep populating your story index and trying this technique out.
I have a question. I feel like the story I'm writing is a story that's told over many different stories. So I think that the formulation of those stories kind of has an arc. So when I'm writing individual stories, should I still be looking for there to be some sort of a resolution or arc within the individual stories that I'm pointing out? Because I feel like if I want to like leave that reader kind of hanging to want to read the next story, it's hard to like resolve an issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I would tell you this, you are way overthinking it.
Okay.
Just write something, and then all of these things will be resolved over time. So I guess what I would share with you is like, just write whatever the way you want to write it and however you want to write it, right, for now. But don't try to overthink it, because again, what's going to happen is things are going to change so many times over this stuff that I would just write things at a first draft of it and finish the story in a way that is finished. Now, if you don't want to answer these sorts of things, great. Like, you can resolve it in other ways down the road, but don't try to overly plan about writing a book right now. Just write individual chunks, and then you'll be able to use those in appropriately when we get into the manuscript phase down the way. I'll give you this last piece of advice, Sam. I think the biggest thing that I would say is that people who focus on writing a book right now don't write enough stories. And so I would just tell you to just write. Don't worry how they fit together. Don't worry if they're interesting. Don't worry if they're good. Just get in the habit of practicing writing stories and writing up content, because you will get a lot of feedback. You'll get these things better over time. But for now, it's just about getting words on a page.
Okay. Thanks.
I know it feels unnatural. Like, it definitely feels unnatural, but that's the way. Just finish whatever way it is. If you want to leave it hanging or not, don't worry about it. Just sort of finish it, and then again, over time, when we pull it into a structure, it'll also sort of make sense.
Thank you.
I got one question.
Yeah.
So like, let's say I come across a really good story, but it doesn't necessarily fit into my topic. Is it still good to write about it?
Yeah, I would say write whatever you're inspired by at this point. So, and again, the thing that I would share with you is, if you find a story out there that has been written somewhere else and you just want to include it in your book, you can do that, right? I mean, definitely don't plagiarize, meaning like don't copy things and not cite it, right? But if you want to if you find a story that you want to tell, right? Like, you saw me writing my notes maybe you saw about Hasan Minhaj. He told a story on an interview that he did with Gary Vaynerchuk, and I took that story that he told and included it in my book. I mean, I cited where I read it and heard it from, but take whatever stories you're inspired by and just fit it within the framework, and you'll add your flavor of what makes it great. So even if it doesn't feel like it perfectly fits yet, but it somehow might, write it. Tell the story.
Thank you.
Yeah. And again, if you get through this process and you're like struggling and you hate it, like, write whatever way you want. Like, I would just tell you, like, the better goal is to sort of just get words down on a page. It'll get better over time, but try the methodology out. You'll find that it'll help turn you into a little bit better of a storyteller over time. But just try it. Again, it will feel a little bit weird. You're like, I don't understand how this fits perfectly, or, do these things not do, or whatever it is. It's going to be about reps, like doing this over and over again. And you'll see, Carson has watched a lot of these authors grow. The first week is really rough. Like, it's tough to do this one. So write a couple things this week that you find, and then getting some feedback on it will help you get better. And that's kind of what the developmental editors will be doing, this sort of stuff. Again, the goal is sort of to write a few things per week. Again, the target for this first chunk of content you're going to create for your developmental editor over the next 2 weeks is about 3,000 to 5,000 words of content is what you're targeting, right? That's kind of what a typical author will do. If you have a busy week and you get 1,000 words, fine. Like, don't beat yourself up over it, right? You're going to do it. Or if you get super inspired and write 10,000 words, ye fucking ha, right? The idea really is just to start writing, getting feedback on it, getting stuff down on a piece of paper. Because what will happen is over these sort of big chunks of milestones, you'll get further along the way. But this is, again, there's no ahead, behind, whatever it is. Just like create whenever you can. And I would say at a minimum, come here, structure the content every week, see what you can get written out there one. And then, as things go, things will go. If you have a busy week with finals or midterms, great. You just don't write very much that week. And if you're inspired, you write a bunch, awesome in that way too.
Yeah, because we rather have you guys continually trying whenever you feel inspired instead of waiting until the last week to start. So we don't want that to happen. So
yeah. And I think just don't feel like you have to. Again, if you're busy a week and you get behind, that's totally fine. Like I always tell the story of Peter Hamilton, who he was just kept doing interviews. He really was enjoying the interviewing process. And, kind of at the publisher pre-approval stage, he had about 5,500 words done. And pre-approval means you need to hit about 20,000 words. So the publisher will pre-approve you have 20,000 words, and your development editor deems them to be, decent quality stories. And I remember Carson was on Peter, dude, you got to get writing. You got to get writing. He's like, I will. And finally, 5 days beforehand, I remember shooting it. I was like, man, it's 5 days. And, it's fine if you don't want to, if you don't get pre-approved, not a big deal, whatever, you'll get to it. But sure enough, he wrote 15,000 words in 5 days. And it turned out it was really, really quite good. So it's possible to get in those sorts of things. But part of it is he's been doing a lot of the work to structure things and have stuff along the way. So, whatever it is, don't stress yourself out about these sorts of things. Try and write when you can, write whatever it is, write shittier. But just keep creating. And again, to Peyton's point, who knows, whatever the story inspires you, great. I wrote a story about bagels that just happened to strike me from a Facebook video. Or Sam, don't worry about whether it fits into something else or not, just write. And it will all kind of come together. You'll find the manuscript creation process when we pull this stuff together kind of will help resolve some of those issues, but just don't stress is sort of the thing to do. Just create. There you go. So I'll get out of here. I'll let you guys hang out, maybe spend another 10 minutes and then sort of share what your plans are for the week. And then I'll be talking to hopefully all of you this week sort of about where you are. But this is fun. It's going to start to get fun. We're going to learn how to become good storytellers. It's going to be it'll be a challenge because nobody teaches you this, but eventually you'll find oh God, thank God I learned this because now I know how to tell stories better. So cool. All right, guys, I'll see you all this week. And thanks, Carson.
Eric.
Fun, guys.
Yeah, see you, Eric. Okay, so I'll give it till 9:45, and then we'll do a around the horn with what our plans will be for the stories. Try and definitely sound like you know what you're doing. So yeah, I'll give you a couple minutes then. Okay, so we'll give a few more minutes. Start wrapping up or summarize whatever you have done. All right. So to wrap up today, we'll do a little bit of around the horn. Just kind of tell us what you plan to work on this week. Maybe reference some interviews or secondary interviews you've done, that kind of stuff. So I guess I'll start, and I'll call out names again like usual. So just to remind everybody, my topic's about startups and like founder mentality and stuff. And I had a really cool interview this week with this guy named Aviel who had a really awesome startup and like went into VC later. And but he had a lot of difficulties early on. Like a lot of people told him no. A lot of people doubted him, including his parents and like his friends and stuff. And I also was doing like secondary interviews on Mark Cuban. And when he was like in his teens, his parents told him that he should be laying carpet because they were worried about his future. So it's those kind of things I'm going to write a story about, like gathering or like having entrepreneurial spirit kindled by like facing skepticism, because in those cases, for example, a lot of their success was built directly from people doubting them. So that's one of my stories I'm thinking about doing. Another one I'm thinking about is that not only can entrepreneurial spirit, like you can be born with it, but you can also be inspired to it. I'll bring up my own story, like going into college. I wanted nothing to do with entrepreneurship. I was like really interested in finance, but through like a number of things, I got really involved into it, and I'm really happy now, like that I'm doing it. And so I can talk about that, but also one of my interviewees wasn't into entrepreneurship or like starting their own stuff until a couple of years ago. And now they say they want to do it for like the rest of their life. So that's pretty cool. So I'll write something like that. And the third thing I want to write about is that there's no blueprint or framework for a successful entrepreneur. It's like people have like a common archetype in their head about what is an entrepreneur. But through a lot of research I've done and like people I've interviewed, like many people say like that's not true. I'm holding out on an interview to write this story that I'm doing this week because I think it'll benefit a lot. But basically, I want to say that you don't come in all shapes and sizes, but there are like certain things you do and experiences you can gather that can help you a lot. That can like, even if you don't seem to meet the blueprint, you can or the framework, you can try and like get in to the best of your ability. Okay, so try and give like a 2-minute summary or so about what you want to write a story about. I listed all 3 stories that I had. If you have more or less, feel free. So we'll go Sam. You're muted. I'll unmute you.
Got it.
Should be good. There you go.
So a couple of the stories I want to write about. So since my book is like more a personal story, I kind of want to start with talking about the beginning stages of the grooming process for me. So my book is focused on how victims are groomed by sexual predators. So I'm kind of focusing on that beginning stage. So I'm trying to write the beginning stages of my story, but also the beginning stages of people I've interviewed stories or secondary interviews of people, so I can try to like pinpoint different ways that people are groomed and targeted by perpetrators, and show diversity in that. So my story talking about different vulnerabilities in my life, like having a sister with a disability, how that created like me as a target. For other people, it would be like poverty or not having or being like an orphan and being in foster care was like a vulnerability for other people I interviewed. So I'm trying to like tie those all together in different stories.
Awesome. Sounds great. Now we'll go to Julia.
Hi. Oh, hold on.
Hmm.
Okay, better. Hi. So my topic is on vulnerability and acceptance. So just using our voice to speak about how we're feeling and how we can accept ourselves and others. And I want to write about how I was traveling in Utah, and I'm a huge germaphobe, and that's one thing that I get scared to talk about because that's my anxiety and my OCD. And my knife at a restaurant touched the table, and I got this huge wedge of lettuce. So one of my first stories that I've actually been working on is called like I Can't Cut My Own Lettuce, because a grown-up had to cut it for me. I'm 21 years old, because I was too scared to tell her that I'm a germaphobe and I couldn't use my own knife. So I'm just gonna introduce with that story on how all we have to do is speak up, and then we could help others understand how we're feeling. But the reason why we can't be vulnerable is because we literally just don't say the simple things of how we're feeling. So that's one story. And then another one is how people think people with mental health or people with issues are faking or just trying to seek attention. And one thing I found in a lot of my interviews is that people have suffered greatly because people thought they were faking. So I'm going to kind of use that as an awareness factor. Someone I interviewed actually lost an ovary. I forget what it was, but they didn't think anything was wrong with her after she kept going to the hospital before she had a baby. And the doctors saw she was diagnosed with anxiety, so just told her, oh, that's all your anxiety. But then she lost a part of her because that person didn't take the time to listen to her and believe her. So I'm going to kind of tie in how all we have to do is speak up. And then if we do speak up, how we could help others understand that we're truly being vulnerable. So those are my story ideas.
Awesome. No, these are great, guys. I'm happy to see you're putting like a lot of thought and passion into it. This is a great start. We'll go next to Peyton.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Awesome. So I took a week off last week, just focused on classes, but I'm back this week. I've done about 10 interviews so far, so I feel like I'm good on my primary interview side of things. Gotten some really good stories from that. This week, I'm going to focus on the secondary interviews when it comes to researching really cool people that are, amazing in the food industry. And one of those people is Yami Kin, and she introduced tofu into the United States back in the 1900s during World War I as a way for soldiers to get new sources of protein. So obviously tofu is more popular now than it was in the 1900s, but it was definitely the start to a really cool movement and particularly about making food attractive. So the first couple stories are going to be how people make food attractive, what food's out there, what were they before they were like this, So some interesting stories like Yamies I'm going to try to find and write about this week.
Awesome. That's cool. It's very interesting that you found that. All right, now we'll go to Nico.
Excellent. So basically, my book is about guerrilla marketing, but it's slowly transitioning to, I don't know, becoming much more. I'm much more fascinated with making marketing culturally relevant. So finding your own little niches within product services and kind of targeting that niche and kind of getting those people to spread your word, the word your message and all that fun stuff. So this week, I am going to do my secondary interviews on Seth Godin, Gary Vee, and then I bet we all remember the Dollar Shave Club, their little commercial that they had a couple years ago, and how they continue to do that. So finding out how they find their niches within culture and then able to market directly to those. They're kind of playing around with that. Last week, I just did interviews, so I haven't really touched my secondary interviews yet. So I'm super excited to kind of see where this new topic or this new kind of direction takes me.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Next, we'll go to Katie.
Hi. So kind of like Peyton, I was kind of off the grid this week, but I'm excited to get back in and organized. So I think I'm excited to talk to Eric tomorrow because my topic is cultivating community, but I've done like 14 interviews right now so far, and I feel like now I'm kind of getting a stronger focus, and I'm excited to talk to him about that because I think I want to focus in specifically on music and travel communities and the intersection of the two. So then I'm going to work on those stories, and something I'm going to start with is kind of how I started to experience music in a new way with the So Far Sounds platform, which is Songs for a Room, if anyone's familiar with it. But you show up to a secret location and there's 3 or 4 bands there, and you don't know who it's going to be. So I'm talking about the experience of going to a show like that after going to traditional concerts. So, yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, sounds great. Awesome. Well, next we'll go with Grace. Are you there, Grace? She might be away. All right, Kelsey.
Hi, everyone. I did a lot of interviews this week, and I actually have a lot lined up for this week, this coming week as well. So I am kind of still focusing on that, but my topic is remote careers and how they can be implemented in the workplace. So some story ideas that I've been thinking about and just themes I've seen in my primary interviews. I haven't really touched the secondary interviews like everyone's been saying. If you're good at what you do, you can do it anywhere is something that a lot of people are saying. And then like certain technology and like that you need to make it possible. And then also like the generational divides that happen in the workplace. So I have a lot of good primary material for that. I don't know if I'll start actually writing this week. I'm kind of figuring out if I can finish up primary, secondary interviews and then kind of like move on to the writing stages. But it's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds great. Cool. We'll go with Drew next.
So I'm writing about the opioid epidemic and how it's kind of enabled by our culture, specifically in sports injuries. And I did a few interviews, one of which was very powerful. Talked to someone who had a sports injury and eventually became dependent. Got some great primary material from that. But this week I'm going to actually write about Mac Miller and kind of how his lyrics and stuff mention opioids and promote their use, and actually talk about how he unfortunately overdosed and they led to his death.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. No, that's a powerful thing for sure. So we'll let Grace. Are you back?
Yes. I'm sorry.
No, it's all
I was
good.
like sliding between screens, and then you said I'm not here. I was just like, oh.
It's all good. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm writing about the influence of politics on law, and so I had like my first interview this week actually with someone from the Cato Institute, and so he is going to be the director of the constitutional law program there, and we just talked about like his opinion and how he like got to this position, and we talked about like sort of like the judgeship, and so I guess like for me, how the book is going to proceed it really also sort of depends. So the second interview is less depending on whom I got to interview, but I think that the first-hand interview really depends on like what kind of opportunities that I got. For example, there's a very famous constitutional law scholar coming to our campus this Wednesday, and I'm going to meet him and see if he can be interviewed. So I'm still like in the process of figure out like the first hand interview, and I think the second hand interview is really depending on just like Wikipedia and research, you know. Yeah, and I think it's because it's about law and politics, the stories will be, you know, it's a lot of like political connections. I guess that's how it will go.
Yeah, awesome. No, that's exciting for sure. Hope that when you meet that guy, it turns out well. All right, great.
Yeah.
And then awesome. Yeah, last but not least, we'll go with Rachel. Are you there, Rachel?
Yeah, hi.
Oh, yeah, there she is.
Hello.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I'm writing about like intent in health startups and how people like communicate that they're also mission driven, like in alliance with a mission driven company. And one of the stories I found out that a lot of interviewers like have a right and wrong answer that they're waiting to hear. And I just wanted to I thought that was really interesting. So now I'm just kind of pivoting my interviews, but in theory, I would write my opening about like how it's mirrored across industries and people kind of like go into an interview with expectations.
All right, great. No, I think all of you, no, I'm very excited about what I just heard. I think you all definitely have like a good plan to start off with, and I'm happy to see how much thought and like passion you guys are putting into it. So that's the meeting. Thanks everyone for coming. Really appreciate it. This is going to be like similar to what we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing a lot more outlining, a lot more like getting ready to write stories in the meetings up ahead. Good luck with your midterms if you still have them. Have a good rest of your week, guys. Thanks for coming. Have a good night. See ya.